Okay, the title of this video is deliberately provocative. Hyperbole, some would say. But first of all, I am one of many YouTubers routinely fisted by an algorithm that makes Ivan the Terrible look fair and impartial, so you'll indulge me a little clickbait. And secondly, I'm going to justify it. Edward Colston was a 17th century... This guy was born prior to the Acts of Union. So we're going back to a period before there was a Britain. That's the dial we're setting the Black Lives Matter time machine to this week. 17th century merchant, politician, and philanthropist. He built schools, hospitals, and poorhouses in the city of Bristol, West England, with wealth generated from money lending, investments in wine, sherry, cloth, and as deputy governor of the Royal African Company, which, in addition to trading gold, silver, and ivory, trafficked slaves and the products of slave labour, such as sugar, to the British colonies in the Caribbean. In 1895, almost 200 years after Colston's death, a man by the name of James Arrowsmith, who was then president of the Anchor Society, a charity Colston set up, and that is still around today, by the way. They gave 80 grand last year to care homes and such. This bloke Arrowsmith was like, wow, we're doing great work with this charity. We're educating the poor, giving people dignity in their old age. Let's erect a statue to honour the man who made all that possible, Edward Colston. And they did. They built a statue as a celebration of philanthropy, really. Erected it in Bristol city centre, and there it stood until last Sunday, when a group of... I don't know how to describe them. I mean, I want to be fair, but what's the PC term for cunts? Let me know in the comments. Toppled the thing and dumped it in Bristol Harbour. Now, this is, of course, but a skirmish in what can only be described as a cultural genocide taking place across the West at the moment. And make no mistake, this is right out of the China of the late 60s, and they're just getting started, okay? Most of these people are young, dumb, and full of communist cum. I mean, they're brainwashed students, and the unions of these places need to be thoroughly gutted. I mean, just professionally purged at this point, and we've known that for a while now. That doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me are the adults, and I use that term loosely, external to the situation, journalists, politicians, who have come out as essentially pro-mob. And this, if allowed to continue, will be the end of us, for rather obvious reasons. When Bart Simpson cut off the head of Jebediah Springfield, what was the first thing he learnt? That everyone in a position of authority, his parents, teachers, police, even the local bullies, right, were angry, disappointed, and would discipline him. They would hold him to account. All of the social norms in Springfield were in place to enforce a basic understanding that violent and emotional attacks on an inherited culture are not a million miles away from violent and emotional attacks on the people within that culture. Dickheads like Andrew Adonis, however, must have skipped that episode. I hope no action is taken against those who removed mass slave trader Edward Colston's statue. Removed! Like they had an appointment. Like they showed up with a van. It wasn't removed, Andrew, you polished knob. It was torn down by an angry mob. And imagine hoping no action is taken in response to an act of public criminality. It's on fucking film. This should have happened decades ago. His name has been removed from other monuments in Bristol. Well, Andrew, I can help you out there. It's called due process. It's called the rule of law. It's called reaching community consensus via peaceful and democratic means. It's not as if Labour don't control both the council and City Hall and have done since before I was born, right? They could have replaced that statue, but the evidence indicates that most Bristolians would have actually opposed that. A survey conducted by the Bristol Post, for example, back in 2014, granted, revealed that only 44% wanted Colston gone, and the current mayor, more to the point, Marvin Rees, was in the process of updating the plaque for it. Right? He was unhappy with the wording or something and wanted it changed. Either way, he clearly wasn't advocating removing the thing. I mean, does anyone care about these details, or is it just the mob has spoken? Right, Andrew? What the mob wants, the mob gets. Fucking ridiculous. Drown yourself. Nobody wants to see injured police officers, don't they? I think maybe the people injuring them do. But toppling statues is what can happen during protests. Again, the language. These things just happen, man. What's the big deal? Act of God, chill out. All of the agency is sucked from these people, which is Black Lives Matter in spades, in fucking spades. It defines them. Brexit protests had violent incidents. Two wrongs make a who cares there. And I don't think they did, actually. Not like this. Point me to the statue that was desecrated by Brexiteers, Adil. Did Nigel Farage lead a mob to Parliament Square to yank Richard the Lionheart from his horse? Get that French fucker back to Europe with you, you frog-eating ponce. I don't remember that. I think the BBC would have reported it. Emily Pankhurst was labelled a terrorist as she fought for your right to vote. The road to justice is not always a smooth one, and there you have it. I mean, the psychosis of these people laid bare. They actually believe they are oppressed. They actually believe that black people in Britain today are the equivalent of women before universal suffrage. Excuse me, black people can vote in this country, fuckface. They've been able to do that for quite some time. They have all the rights, as many as you and I have. If slavery was still going on in Bristol in 2020, your analogy would make some sense. It isn't, and it doesn't. You're a twat. Woke leftists in 2003 destroying history. So he's mocking people like me. And then there's a video of the Saddam statue being toppled by Iraqis following the Anglo-American invasion. Brilliant. Okay, so this is actually offensive. And I know that's a faggot word, but I don't care. I mean, how else do I describe an attempt to equate Iraqis toppling the statue of a genocidal dictator that probably killed people they knew, right? Like members of their own family, who was alive at the time and technically still the president, with a part-time slave trader who's been dead 300 years. I mean, I don't think it gets worse than that, but these false equivalencies are rampant. I've seen people bring up Hong Kong to me as well, which I think the next person I see do that on Twitter, I'm just going to block outright, because I cannot deal with the stupidity. Let me show you. Right, okay. You'll remember I made a video last week supporting the people of Hong Kong, in which I included a now somewhat famous clip of protesters pinning the colonial flag to the furniture of the legislature. Because, believe it or not, many people there, not all by any means, but some, would happily rejoin the British Empire if it meant they could escape the tyranny of communist China. Believe me, I've talked to these people. They get it. Okay? They understand how lucky they are and they appreciate what they have. Contrast them with this festering anal sore who climbed onto the cenotaph, the war memorial, last weekend, not to raise a British flag, but to set one on fire. Somebody who has all the benefits of living in a free and tolerant, easily the most tolerant society ever devised. And that's his response. Get out. Get the fuck out. I mean it.
Get the fuck out!
And that goes for anybody. White, black, bloody rainbow coloured. I don't care. You don't have to be here. Okay? You're free in body and soul. If you hate this country so much that you would attempt to destroy its national symbol in public like that, I want a divorce. Fuck off. Imagine this little shit having a conversation with somebody from Hong Kong. Imagine him complaining to them, "Oh, I'm so oppressed. The British are racist. They expect me not to commit crime." They'd fucking slap him. But again, where are the adults? Can somebody regulate here, please? Is there a grown-up anywhere in the room?
Well, one man who knows all about the controversy surrounding that statue of Edward Colston is the directly elected Mayor of Bristol, Labour's Mayor Rees. He joins us now. Mr. Rees, do you support the police in their search for those responsible for criminal damage, or do you support the tearing down of this statue?
Well, putting up those kind of binary options really doesn't help us navigate a complicated world, Krishnan. What I cannot do as an elected politician is support criminal damage or social disorder like this. But I would never pretend that the statue of a slaver in the middle of Bristol, the city in which I grew up, and someone who may well have owned one of my ancestors, was anything other than a personal affront to me. And I cannot, and I've obviously shared my concerns about the potential public health dangers of mass gatherings.
I don't like this guy. I'm calling it. It's early days, but he started off by dodging the question. It was quite simple. Do you support what they did or don't you? Didn't answer it. Then he reluctantly denounced the violence. Did you catch that? Well, as a public official, I suppose I've got to condemn it. It's probably a legal requirement that I do, but let's not pretend what they did was morally wrong, because it wasn't, right? Oh, fuck that statue. Am I right? That was the vibe he just gave me. Not good enough. You are complicit, sir.
Well, why was that statue still up in the way it was then? Is that a failure of democratic politics, or is it the result of democratic politics?
Well, it's been there. It's been a point of debate for the city and tension in the city for some time. But Bristol only really started to talk about its slaving history in a meaningful way at the turn of the millennium. And dare I say, politicians, but not just that, journalists as well, did not cover this in a mature way. And the city struggled to cope, as they did when it got to Abolition 200 year as well. So the city's not been equipped to have that kind of a debate about what the statue is and the place it holds in giving the city meaning today.
Well, that is your responsibility. Don't pass the buck. I've said this before. You're perfectly entitled to get together with the council and decide to remove that statue. Put it in a museum, right? Replace it with somebody else. It's not something I would do, but I'm not in charge of Bristol. More's the pity. You could have done that. But you weren't interested in pressing the matter. Clearly, as I said, by all accounts, you were working on getting the plaque updated. It's quite a leap from that position to take it down, isn't it? It's an even bigger leap from that position to tear it down in a criminal riot and chuck it in the harbour. Fuck me.
But if you look at that phrase, criminal damage, that the police have used, and the Home Secretary has supported them and said it's terrible, what's happened. Who has done more criminality and more damage? You know, is it the protesters or is it Colston?
Objection? Leading the witness? What kind of fucking question was that? And I'm not surprised. I mean, Krishna Guru Murthy, I mean, that man, I'm sorry, but I would throw him into a crocodile pit for half a Coke. I mean, he is worthless. I mean, a stupid fucking non-journalist, Krishna Guru Murthy, who spends more time on comedy panel shows these days than he does in the Channel 4 studio, because it's all about getting that face out there. Isn't it, Krishna? Ooh, look at me, I'm a celebrity, yay! I'll answer the question. It makes no goddamn sense, but I'll answer it. The protesters have done more criminality, okay? The protesters. Because, for a start, and this gets at what's behind my cheeky little title, Edward Colston wasn't a criminal. He didn't do anything illegal. Now, he did something immoral, and in 2020, we all recognise that, yeah? In fact, in 1833, we recognised that in this country when we abolished the slave trade. But Colston died more than 100 years prior to that event, at a time when every man and his fucking dog was trading slaves. What do you want of people? Which statue comes down next, is my actual question. William of Orange? Because he's standing in Queen Square, for now, and it might interest you to know that when Edward Colston left the Royal Africa Company in 1689, guess who he sold his shares to? William of Orange. Go back far enough and apply this ludicrous Marxist revisionism and everyone becomes a monster. Shall we tear his statue down? Serious question. I mean, he was only king of the fucking nation for a decade, right? I mean, why would the English want to commemorate him? Doesn't that make them pro-slavery or something? You're a fucking joke. And what's more, these rioters are breaking the law of today. Okay? So by today's moral and legal standards, these people fall short. These people are criminals and should be in jail. This is not difficult. Jesus.
Well, I mean, if you weigh up the two, clearly Colston would be a bigger criminal.
He wasn't a criminal. He was not a criminal.
That offers us a debate that perhaps isn't always very helpful. And look, I mean, I heard about the Home Secretary's remarks, you know, and I can understand that's, you know, I'm not condoning criminal damage and that kind of disorder, particularly as we work closely with the police and it's their responsibility and so many offers come into positions of risk. We recognise that. But as a politician, you are not a police officer. As a politician, one of your jobs is to understand your country. In 68, 67, Martin Luther King said...
Brilliant. So understand the people of your country today, which is Britain, 2020, by quoting an American man who lived 50 years ago. Martin Luther King has nothing to do with us. Nothing to do. American history is not British history, sir. They saw to that in 1776, and good luck to them. But that applies both ways. I don't even care what he said. I mean, you can listen to it if you want. I'll link the full video below, but it's irrelevant. It's so irrelevant to this discussion that I can't be bothered. Next.
But on the doorstep, someone's going to ask you, do you support prosecution for those people?
And what I will say on the doorstep is, in more than just 3 seconds, explain all the dynamics that are at play here. And it really underserves the country, underserves our ability. Has historically ever explained to you what's happened in the city before, when you try and fit it in a headline or a soundbite to go in a 10-second news clip?
Oh, this is so disingenuous. Now is not the time to be discussing the legacy of Edward Colston. Mervyn, if you want a debate on that down the line, fine, I'll have it with you and then you'll lose. But it is your responsibility as an elected official in the immediate aftermath of a serious case of mob violence and cultural vandalism to condemn that in no uncertain terms and end the conversation. We will not tolerate this, period. If people have concerns about the statue of Edward Colston or any other person, they voice those concerns through me and their elected officials. This is such basic shit. I can't believe we're at this point.
What we have are a number of things that are true at the same time. This is criminal damage. We cannot accept criminal damage. We cannot accept social disorder. But at the same time, we have a statue up to someone who made their money by throwing sometimes the bodies of his commodities, our people, into water. There's a piece of kind of almost historical poetry here that, and now is on the bottom of the water.
So you are justifying it. You just called it poetry. And did your grandmother ever tell you to be wary of the word but? That whatever comes before that word is what they think you want to hear, and whatever comes after is what they actually think? Well, that's what we're getting with this guy, right? It's as plain as can be. You heard him right there. Our people. Colston made a living killing our people. The psychological weakness and collective hysteria running through sections of our country stinks. It stinks to high heaven. It's a disgrace. As if we all couldn't play that game if we wanted to. I mean, some of you might be aware, I am of Irish stock. Okay, I know you can't tell from my accent, but my father was from Dublin. Imagine if I went to Westminster tomorrow, pulled down the statue of Cromwell and chucked it in the Thames on that basis. What would you think of me if I were to do something so pathetic, so base, so utterly stupid? Cromwell murdered our people 400 years ago, so fuck you, England, and your statue. My feelings and tribalistic hang-ups trump your culture, your history, your right to remember whoever the fuck you want to remember. For whatever reason you want to remember them. I wouldn't do that because I'm not a brat.
I'm not condoning the criminality. What I'm saying is you have to understand the country you're working with, the frustrations, of the people and the frustrations at this moment. And Priti Patel can be outraged, but it would be, we would also love to hear some outrage about the deaths in custody, in both here and in the United States, ongoing racial inequality.
And out comes the fucking vomit at last. The Black Lives Matter horse shit. The utterly baseless, moronic, mentally ill worldview these people have. Racial inequality. That they are directly responsible for, by the way. The kind of inequality he's talking about. They don't father their children. They don't obey the law. They don't hold down a job. And now that's everyone else's problem, isn't it? We have to solve it for them. Like the fucking babies they are. And deaths in police custody? You dare bring up deaths in police custody? You don't know your facts, sir. The numbers are in. Sargon just did a video on this where he lays them out. Surprised even me, to be honest. But less than one black person a year dies in police custody in Britain. Less than one a year. More people die by shark than by copper in this country. A black person in Britain is more likely to kill himself putting his underwear on than by a run-in with the law, despite all the fucking crime they're committing. In spite of it, they're handled with kid gloves, kid fucking gloves, and it's still not good enough. Can you tell I'm at the end of my rope with this, okay? If there was any justice left in Britain, that statue would be pulled out of the Avon and put right back where it belongs, right back, with a little amendment to the plaque, okay? This statue was pulled down by an incensed rabble on the 7th of June 2020 and has been restored to remind people that we are a democracy that values the rule of law, and such acts of criminality will not be tolerated. Then the perpetrators would be arrested, tried, and made an example of. Maximum sentences, which for vandalism I think is roughly 3 months behind bars. Throw the book at them. Now, none of that is going to happen. Well, I think they might get arrested, actually, and possibly fined. And the day that happens, I will pour myself a little brandy in the evening, relax by the fire, reflect on life, and offer a symbolic toast to Edward fucking Colston.
These are, I mean, the problem is that there are people who excuse one of these, and then in the end you're on this famously slippery slope where you basically have to tolerate all of it. And I think it's all intolerable. I don't think that crowds and mobs do have the right to pull down things that they claim to be outraged by. And by the way, I don't think they are outraged, particularly by this statue in Bristol. The statue was put up because clearly the city was paying homage to the philanthropy of the man in question. Now, statues are a notoriously tricky issue. They are in every country because they tell you things about your past. But there is a misunderstanding, among other things, that the mob that operated yesterday in Bristol had. People seem to actually think that in some way this statue was there because of celebrating the slave trade, or emulating it, or worshipping it in some way. Now, the scenes themselves were reminiscent of somewhere in the Middle East or something, where after a revolution, and where everybody's passions just go wild. I mean, the mob jumping on the statue of Edward Colston and jumping up and down it was this deranged behavior. I mean, this was a deranged mob. And there are people, of course, who, again, want to push their own political agenda through and say, oh, if you're critical of the pulling down of the statue, it must mean you're pro-slavery. I mean, please, how simplistic these people want to make our world. The fact is that some of us are very worried about it because we know from history, one of the important things about studying history, what happens when mobs go around operating like this. And it's exactly what has been happening in London and elsewhere. It's been happening in Brussels, it's happened in Stockholm, which is that people become more and more emboldened about what they're allowed to do by a society, and a police force that's become cowed by them. Particularly young people, particularly young men throughout history have this. They test what the limits of violence are. They test what their elders are going to allow them to get away with. And once they've got away with one thing, they try to get away with the next. And there seems to me to be no quarter to give on this, because there are very interesting and important discussions to happen about our past, but they're not this one-directional mob behavior to tell us what our past was. And the worst way in which you can have an actually meaningful discussion about that is for a group of people to act like thugs and start smashing things and start attacking policemen. And also then for the media in this country to be so cowed, not everywhere, but so significantly cowed, that people in the media even are fearful of saying, no, this is mob behavior, this is thug behavior. We don't tolerate it on any issue.